All right, welcome everyone to our Green Thumb Thursdays. I'm Beth Herrick with Morrisson-Reeves Library, and we're so happy we could have you here on Earth Day. Planned it that way to celebrate, wearing green for the occasion. Stephanie McCurdy is going to be our presenter tonight. Stephanie's from Cope Environmental Center. She's been here before, so we have good memories of her here and happy to have her again. Tonight's topic is gardening made easy. So you're going to learn tips from a master about gardening. And I know there will be time for questions as well. I'm going to pass it on over to Stephanie. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you, Beth, and I'm so excited to be here today on Earth Day, because what better way to celebrate the earth than to start a garden, right? Yes. So the last time I was here, I talked about composting and worms. Did anybody go home and start a compost pile or a worm bin? No? I mean, it's kind of not been the best weather lately, right?
I told my grandchildren.
Yeah. There was actually a lady who came by the Cope Center this week, specifically to learn about worm bins. And we, in the classroom, we have one that is about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep and about 2.5 feet tall. And it looks like a log cabin, and it has tons and tons of worms in it. So we gave her the grand tour of the giant worm bin, and hopefully she got pretty excited. I don't know. We had some good stuff in there composting, so banana peels, some flowers, some snake skins from our snake cages, and fun stuff. So today, like Beth said, I'm going to talk to you about gardening made easy, an introduction to gardening. Sometimes, how many of you are really seasoned gardeners? Just one? Perfect. Maybe two? When I first started into the natural resource world years and years ago, I was raised on a farm, and my grandmother, her name was Joy Gay. She was an amazing person. She's passed away now, but she had this giant garden, and she had the most beautiful houseplants, the most beautiful flower beds. Everything was perfectly landscaped, and she had this garden that was always amazing. And I helped her in the garden when I was a kid, and the garden was right next to the horse pasture. So you know how you weed a little bit, and then you play with the horses, and then you weed a little bit, and then you play with the horses. So it was fun to work in the garden, because it really wasn't, to me, it wasn't working in the garden, it was playing with the horses. And then my mom never really had that big of a garden. She always just kind of threw her stuff into Grandma's garden. So then when Grandma stops gardening, and I was hitting my early 20s, it became this whole thing, like, Stephanie's going to start a garden. And I thought it was going to be super easy, because Grandma always made it look really easy. So I walked out to this plot in the yard, and this is where I'm going to put my garden. So the first thing I have to do is rototill it up, right? Well, I didn't have a rototiller, so I thought I'll just hoe it up after I lawn mow it. And then the next thing I know, my garden was itty bitty, and I was frustrated. And gardening didn't really go all that far. But then I decided I'm going to plant these plants. And then all of a sudden there's all these weeds. And Grandma never had weeds. Like, where did all these weeds come from? How much time is this going to take? How am I going to know what to grow? What am I going to plant? Oh my goodness. How long does it take this tomato to become a tomato? Because Grandma's never took this long. And my cucumbers, there's something going on with them. They're not turning out right. Like, gardening just became overwhelming to me. So, of course, I went to the library, because on a side note to that, I was having kids at the same time and raising them TV free, which means we had an awful lot of time to read and spend at the library. And studied up about gardening, became an Indiana master gardener, and really kind of worked my way through it. And so tonight, when I was thinking about how am I going to teach gardening made easy, because for me it didn't come easy, I was thinking that I would help you guys learn some tricks to make it a little easier for you to start gardening. So, I'm from the Cope Environmental Center. We are celebrating Earth Day every day at the Cope Environmental Center. We promote the sustainable use of the Earth's resources through education, demonstration, and research. We have huge gardens there. Our garden beds have been rototilled. We started about 15 seeds in the building. We need to start a bunch more. And we will be transplanting those after May 15th. Do you guys know why we wait till May 15th? Frost. And those occasional weird April snows, right?
Yeah.
My kids ask me if April snows bring May flowers too. So we will be tackling our gardens after the first or the second week of May, and I believe we have Seton coming out to help us plant our gardens this year. So what is gardening? We're going to define that for you first. It's the activity of tending and cultivating a garden, especially as a pastime. We certainly don't want to garden as a job, because if it becomes a job, it's too much work, right? So we want to be able to enjoy it as a pastime and have gardening be a hobby. Mary Jane Duford said gardening is a hobby that presents many opportunities to learn and new techniques to try out. So I'm sure if you're a seasoned gardener, you know that sometimes you grow something and you think, this totally isn't working for me, so you try something a little different. I know that one of my first gardens, I would go out at night with my flashlight, and the slugs were amazing. So the kids and I would go out and we would catch all the slugs, and we made a little slug hotel for them and everything. And then we decided we were just going to eradicate them. But I couldn't bring myself to kill them because there was way too many. Killing one or two is okay, right? Maybe. But there was like hundreds. So we would collect them all at night, and then the next day when my brother was at work, we'd take him to his house and turn them loose there in his garden. Is your thumb green? How many of you guys would claim a green thumb? How many of you guys are like, my thumb is so brown, it's embarrassing? Okay, well the great news is that you can have a green thumb. We can turn the color from brown to green. Gardens take some planning for success. We have to take a lot of factors into consideration when we're planning our garden. But planning is the key to make it work for you. I think one of the biggest tips I can give you in terms of gardening is look at your space, think about your time, and then consider the size. My grandmother's garden was huge, so of course when I finally figured out how much land I'm going to actually put into a garden, I got the neighbor farmer to bring over his plow, which was fantastic. So he plowed me up a garden that was every bit the size of this room. So then I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I can grow enough food for the whole year. I can feed the family with this garden. But this is a lot of work to garden in a space this big. And what I ended up doing was, I eventually filled it full of all kinds of stuff. But that first year, it was just a disaster. And then I planted about, 20 feet by 30 feet in asparagus, and then a giant strawberry bed, and then there was a big 12 by 12 foot space that I left as sheer mud lined with some railroad ties. And then I threw out a bunch of toys that I got at a garage sale so that when I was gardening, the kids could stay right there and stay busy, and then the rest of it was my garden that I cultivated. I stayed pretty busy for like the 3 years that I gardened that much, because I went out every morning and started in the garden, and then worked until about noon, and then went out every night after dinner and worked until dark to keep it all going. The other great thing the other easy way to keep your thumb green is to check your garden every day for moisture, make sure it needs water, sun, make sure you're getting enough sunlight to your garden. You can tell because if you're not getting enough sunlight, your plants don't grow quite as tall. And look for pests like the slugs, or the tomato hornworms, or Jonathan already came and did his pest talk, right? So if you guys have listened to Jonathan's pest talk, he did a great job probably. He's done that for years. But look for pests and then remove whatever you can. For a great garden, you have to consider what do your plants need to survive. So this one kind of seems like a no-brainer, but sometimes there's some factors that we don't think about when we're gardening. Of course, they all need water. They all need air. We all know that plants produce oxygen for us to breathe. So when we take a deep breath, we are breathing in oxygen and we're breathing out carbon dioxide. When the plants take a deep breath, they're breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. I always tell the kids at the Coop Center when we're walking through the woods, you guys are breathing the freshest air possible because these leaves just made it for you. But your garden is kind of like the same thing. And I don't know that anybody has touched on the health benefits of gardening, but studies have shown that if you have a garden, you have you have a better mental health or improved mental health, and that you, when you're working in the garden and working with your hands, just touching the soil, there is a transfer of electrons from your skin to the soil, and that transfer of electrons apparently helps increase your, or like boost your mood. This is a whole weird science that they got going on studying the health benefits of gardening. But science has shown that you are happier if you have a garden. So breathing the fresh air for the plants and connecting with the soil improves your mental health. Soil is a very important part of gardening. We have to have soil for our plants to put their roots in. You guys have all grown plants in water before, right? In high school science class where you decide you're going to make this geranium root, so you take a cutting and you put it in water and eventually it sprouts roots. So you can grow things without soil, hydroponics, but in your home garden you're going to need to have some soil. Shelter from harsh elements. So this one is kind of difficult because we want your garden to be someplace where there is plenty of sunlight, but you want to kind of keep it in an area that isn't like in direct wind. If you've been out to the Cope Environmental Center, you know that we have built our building right in the middle of what used to be a farm field. It is incredibly flat out there. So we don't do a lot of gardening around the new building. When the wind blows, it just whips all the way across that space, and it can be pretty cold out there. So if you have an area that doesn't have a lot of shelter or wind breaks, that wind is going to have an effect on your tomatoes, because your tomatoes, unless you stake them and put them in tomato cages, will fall very easily. It'll affect your corn. So protecting from harsh elements is important, and especially when we have weird April snows, you want to make sure you go out there and throw some sheets on top of your garden too. All the plants need nutrients from the soil, so you want to make sure that you have healthy soil, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then you need to make sure that there is plenty of pollinators and opportunities for your plants to get pollinated by wind as well. Picking your garden site. So when you're looking at your yard and deciding where you're going to put your garden, it's always good to pick a south side of your yard. Your sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and it moves from the east to the west via the south. So the north side of your house is typically always going to be shady, so you want to pick a south area of your yard. If you cannot pick a direct south area, you can pick a southwest area. The southwest side of your house is typically better than the southeast side. Full sun is considered 6 hours or more of sunlight a day. Most of your garden plants, if you're growing for vegetables, prefer full sun. So you'll want an area of your yard that gets 6 or more hours a day. One of the things that you can do to watch that is take, go out there like at 10 in the morning and put a stick in your yard where the sunlight is if there's a shady area, and then go out there 6 hours later and make sure that that area still has the sunlight hitting it, and then you can check and see if you have 6 hours a day. You'll want your area to be pretty flat. Otherwise you have erosion and runoff issues. When it rains, then the water will carry away your particles of soil, and that's not good for your garden as well. I know you live in my area, so you know my backyard is anything but flat. It is pretty much a straight up hill. There are 4 raised beds in the backyard, and those raised beds keep everything from rolling down the hill. But admittedly, my dog has destroyed 2 of my raised beds by taking the wood off of the sides, so now I have some erosion issues happening back there. There's nothing worse than looking out the back window and seeing your dog run around the yard with a giant 1x10. Whoa! But yeah, you want a flat area because it's much easier to garden there than it is to garden on the side of a hill. You want to make sure that you have good soil available. And like I said, we're going to touch on that probably on the next slide. Yes, soil basics. When you look at your soil in your garden, it's made up of 3 different things: sand, silt, and clay. The biggest particle in your soil is going to be the sandy soils, and silt is the smallest particle in your soil. Clay is the particle of soil that holds the most water. So when we look at a handful of soil, like if we looked at a handful of this soil and held it up, it's made up of particles of all 3 of those. And an ideal soil is called a loam, and those loams would have 33% sand, 33% soil, 33% clay. Now, in Indiana, we have some of the most fertile soils in the world. We have, historically, the state of Indiana was mostly forested, and the parts of it that weren't forested were tallgrass prairies, and that nutrient cycling through that soil for thousands and thousands and thousands of years produced that rich black colored soil that you see over there in the corner. So then the pioneers and the settlers came through Indiana, and they were like, this soil is amazing. Look at all this fabulous stuff that we can grow here. So what did they do? They mowed down our prairies and tiled the northern third of the state. And then they cut down a lot of our trees in the middle section of the state to make all these farm ground. This is like a whole did you know, right? The top third of the state was prairies and wetland, and it was known as the Everglades of the North because this top half of Indiana, the Kankakee Marsh area, was the second biggest wetland as opposed to the Everglades in North America. So they drained all of that, the wetland and the prairies up there, and turned it into farm ground because it had such great soils. So then they grow the crops year after year after year after year after year, and each year they're taking stuff away from the soil and not really adding that stuff back into the soil. And so then we end up with soil that's been depleted of its nutrients, and it looks like this. Also, when we talk about erosion and a lot of the rain, it carries away those smaller 2 pieces of particles, the silt and the clay. And when it washes that into our waterways, then it fills in some of our ponds and lakes and reservoirs, and causes pretty big problems there as well. But it's estimated that in Indiana, a farm field will lose about a ½ inch of soil a year, which is where our earthworms come in. If you guys were here for the earthworm talk, our earthworms can create an inch of soil in about 50 years. So they don't really make up for it, but they're trying really hard, right? So when you're looking in your yard and looking for a spot to put your garden, you're going to want to look for soil that is darker in color. The darker your soil, the better the soil. If it's kind of the lighter colored soil, whether it's light brown or a light gray, it needs some soil amendments put into it. So to do that, you can use compost. I'm a big advocate of a compost pile. Throw in all of your organic waste from your house, your sticks, your leaves, your vegetables, banana peels, apple cores, all of those things. Let it decompose naturally and let the worms come in and the critters do its work. And then you can add that in the fall, add that to your garden beds and incorporate it in there. And it'll turn your soil into that blacker color over time. If you have access to horse manure, you can also add that into your garden beds in the fall. And then I would rototill that in the fall and then rototill it again in the spring, and it'll help improve your soil health too. Anytime you add compost to your gardens, you're adding the soil's ability to retain water to preserve the moisture for the plants. You enhance the plant's natural ability to stand up to common diseases. Think about it as compost is boosting the plant's immune system. Reduce the volume of your household trash. And some people argue that the more compost you use, the more types of compost you use, can enhance the flavor of your vegetables that you're growing because it has more nutrients available to help the plant develop those vegetables. So what is organic gardening? At the Cope Center, we use mostly organic gardening. Organic gardening is basically gardening without pesticides and chemicals. What we use is more of a natural approach to pesticides and a natural approach to fertilizers. So it says here to use naturally occurring materials to support the complex relationships between living organisms and the plants. So when you look at your soil, we don't think about soil as being alive, right? But your soil is very much alive, and if you took a handful of soil and you put it underneath a microscope and you checked it out, things would start moving. And there would be little microscopic mites in the soil, and some bacterial and funguses in there, and that really helps benefit your plants as they're growing through their life cycle as well. So when it says complex relationship between living organisms, it's not necessarily talking about the the cabbage moths or anything like that. It's talking about the things inside the soil that are helping promote plant growth. Organic gardening is based on enriching the existing soil, and rather than depleting it in the name of production. So when you think about modern farming, we are plowing the soil. They're not really adding anything back into the soil. No-till has become a thing where that has kind of helped increase the nutrient retention in farm fields. But in gardening, we really want to make sure that we're taking care of our soil and replenishing what we're taking out with compost, or even leaving stuff on there through the winter. Instead of cleaning up your gardening beds in the fall, you can leave it in there and just clean it up in the spring when you start to plant the next round. So, annuals and perennials. This class, some of you guys might be planting a vegetable garden, and I've geared a little bit towards vegetable gardening, probably talked a lot about that. But I also know that gardening encompasses your front flower beds, because we all want beautiful front yards. And annuals and perennials are part of our flower beds. Annuals are the ones that you have to replant every single year. Perennials are the ones that you plant once and they grow for 3 or more years. We consider those perennials. I, of course, prefer to plant perennials because I don't like replanting every single year. But there are also some very beautiful annuals out there that make lovely flower gardens. I also consider you a gardener if you have a collection of houseplants. And if that collection is 5 houseplants or 45 houseplants, indoor gardening is a real thing. So houseplants are a really great way to keep the air in your house fresh and, kind of provide you with a little bit more mental health, a little mental health boost. My coworker, Amanda, she lives over by Earlham, and she has this incredible collection of houseplants, and she keeps dividing and dividing and dividing. And when you drive by her house, her entire front yard, her porch, it's just covered in all these pots of houseplants. You could probably just knock on her door and ask for one, and she would give you 20. And in Indiana, we have to know our garden zones. This was something that always confused me when I first started gardening, because if you look at where we are here in Richmond, we have a couple different colors there. We have blue and we have green, and Centerville and Richmond is right there on the edge of 2 of them. So we are comfortably in 6A, but you could probably grow stuff that goes into 5 or stuff in the 6B as well. But you want to make sure that you are growing the right plants for the zone. And what that means is that when you look in the back of your seed packets, it tells you, well, of course this one doesn't, because that would be too easy.
Jonathan said this too, and there was something else that was on here. It might have been the zone, I don't remember, because I asked him to find it for me, and he's like, usually it is, and he asked me where I got it.
So on the Burpee packet, there is the zone on the back. On the Green Valley packet, there is not a zone on the back. So this one tells you that we are in zone 6. So you can plant the sunflowers. But some of the things that they sell seeds, like if you go to Lowe's, you could buy seeds for everything. Burpee doesn't really care where you are, so they send all the seeds to every different Lowe's in America. And so you could actually buy seeds for things that you can't grow in Indiana because we're not in the right zone. But people plant them, and then they call me up and they're like, stuffing my avocados, or my it's another one I get all the time. just aren't growing. Eggplants is another one. We don't live in the right zone for that. So they're extremely difficult to grow here. So if you want to take on that challenge and grow something that's not in this zone, it's a great experiment and it could be a lot of fun. You might have some success. But a lot of times those zones are there for a reason and it's difficult to grow things that don't belong in the zone. But the other thing to remember about a gardening zone is also knowing when to plant. So obviously our frost date in Indiana is May 15th. Our frost date in Michigan might be more like May 25th. Our frost date in Georgia is, well, non-existent really, because they don't really have that many frosts down there. So zones are important things to remember when you're looking at different types of plants to plant. When we go into what's native to Indiana, we encourage people at the Cope Center to just plant what's native to Indiana. You don't have to worry about zones so much. But if you're buying ornamental plants from the stores, they might be something that is grown in a different zone and might not grow so well here. Now we're going to talk about types of gardens. So this is where if you're a beginning gardener and you're just like, I just want to know what to get started and I don't want to get overwhelmed with how to plant, these are some new ways to think about gardening in your yard. So Jonathan is coming back next week and he's going to talk a lot about these first two. But this one is container gardening. This is great for small spaces or apartments. This is also really great if you don't like weeding. You can weed your containers really, really fast. Container gardens are great for flowers and vegetables and berry plants. And basically the whole idea here is you just buy a bunch of pots, fill them with soil, plant those pots, and then keep them someplace close to your house or spread around your yard. It doesn't really matter, but the idea is that they're in a container, and a small container, and they're easier to take care of. When I lived on my grandparents' farm and had the giant garden, I got used to having certain things, certain fresh vegetables all the time. I grew all of my lettuces in pots, and then at the end of the growing season in the garden, I moved those pots indoors and grew them in the house. And they were actually in the living room in front of the front window, and the kids would be watching TV when I did finally get a TV for them, because I don't know why I thought 7 years without a TV was a great idea with kids, but I did. They would sit there and watch TV and pick lettuce and spinach and eat it. And so then I'd just rotate the lettuce and the spinach around to the coffee table, and they'd sit there and color and eat spinach right out of the pot. The idea with container gardening is that you can move the plants indoors, you can continue to grow things year round, and you can help protect your pots a lot better. I was going somewhere with that, now I forget. Yes.
I think that growing herbs in pots is fantastic.
Yes.
Yes.
I told somebody the other day, they were telling me they were struggling with some of their herbs. It is much easier to grow an herb garden in pots, but make sure that you start your herbs in pots that are at least 12 inches in diameter and at least 10 inches deep. You need a lot of soil and a lot of root space because most of our herbs are perennials.
Yeah.
So if you're a perennial, you're going to have longer roots, so you're going to want a bigger pot, a deeper pot, and then a bigger diameter one. So herbs do very, very, very well in pots. What else was I going to say about it? All right, it'll hit me like 4 slides from now. Raised beds are the next one. Raised beds are fabulous. They're mostly used for vegetable production. They're easier to plant, weed, and water and maintain than a ground garden. The great thing about raised beds is if you make them narrow enough, you want to be able to reach through the middle of it without compacting the soil down. But you can make them tall enough that you don't have to like squat down on the ground too much either. So if you have it like a 3-foot tall raised bed, you can sit on a 5-gallon bucket and weed instead of being down on the ground on your hands and knees, which I never really appreciated until I hit my 40-year mark, and now I really appreciate that. They can produce bigger yields and they have better drainage. I know Jonathan will tell you all about the benefits of raised beds when he is here next week. Herb gardens. So You're like, I don't know that I really want to have this big full garden, because one of the things about having a giant garden is that all of a sudden at the end of the year, you have to figure out, what am I gonna do with all of this produce? And we've all been there, and then you go to visit the neighbor and they give you 5 zucchinis, but you already have 30 of your own zucchinis, but you don't know what I mean. So maybe you start small and you have an herb garden. You can think about the different herbs that you use every day. The cooking herbs are basil, oregano, sage, thyme, cilantro, parsley, rosemary, chives, crafts, soaps and essential oils and those kind of things are lavender and mint. You should always plant your mint in a container. Catnip as well. Catnip is in the mint family. Mints will spread like wildfire. And they will spread across cement. They will spread across everything. You can tell it's a mint because if you roll it in your fingers, the stem is square. So if you have something that's growing and you're like, what is this? I can't get rid of it. You pick it up and you roll it and it's square. It's a mint. Good luck. It will never die. So always put your mint in a container and don't let it go to seed. If you see it go to seed, pick those flowers off. Mint is actually really, really good if you take the leaves off of your mint and you crush it up, and then you can put it on your window sills or around your door frames. It'll keep out insects and spiders. So there's some great stuff for mint to use. You can also crush up those leaves really fine. I would put them through my little food mill and stick them in a container of water, a spray bottle of water, and then use that as a spray to spray the things, like the areas where I wanted the bugs to stay away from.
Oh, okay. So that way, if you've got cats, that it wouldn't be harmful to them?
No, it wouldn't be harmful to cats, no. It also works if you spray, you know how you spray your water on your cats to make them behave? They don't like the mint water at all, so it also works for that.
That's the tip I need.
That's right. Spray your cat with mint, it smells better and it doesn't like it. Lavender grows back year after year. It's a perennial. You take your hand and just pull up those little purple flowers. You can use that for a lot of different things. You guys, have you ever made rice bags? Where you can sew them in a little beautiful little fabrics, double your fabric so that you don't get a hole in it, and then fill it full of a package of rice. But then you can throw your lavender flowers in there too, and when you microwave it, it'll release that smell of lavender, and it's really relaxing. If you're not a sewer but you need a rice bag because you have that ache and a pain, you can take an old sock, fill it with rice, throw some lavender in there, and microwave it for a minute or two, and then you have that same therapeutic rice bag, I guess. If you have a headache, mint has shown that to help with headaches. So you can take that same rice bag theory, throw some mint in there, microwave it, and then that mint smell and the heat will help alleviate your headache symptoms. I'm no doctor though, so try it your own risk. Yeah, I don't really know if I have much more to say about an herb garden, but this is a great way to use space if you have some challenging issues in your yard with space, and to kind of keep your herbs contained. But I've seen using a what's that thing called?
The tiered garden?
Pallet. That's what I'm at. People have used these pallets and done that same sort of thing, and planted their tomatoes and some other vegetables in there, and kind of save space in that vertical garden piece. Salsa Garden. How many of you guys love salsa? There was one year when I made 130 pints of salsa. That was like the second year I gardened, when I planted 40 some tomato plants because all my tomato seeds grew up. And I was like, well, I can't let them go to waste, so I'll plant them all. Then I had a ton of tomatoes. But a salsa garden is, you're just going to be very specific about what you're planting, right? So you could just plant the tomatoes, the onions, the peppers, the garlic, and the cilantro. And then you have everything you need to make fresh salsa. You can start your tomato seeds indoors in April, and your pepper seeds, and that will give you a longer growing season so that you can have more fresh salsa. At the Cope Center, we plant our salsa ingredients every year, and then we take those ingredients into our senior centers for our senior center programs and make fresh salsa with them. And then we also do that same program with Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, and really anybody else who wanted to come learn how to make fresh salsa straight from the garden. So using that same idea of sticking with the theme, yes, somebody had a question? No? Is Pizza Garden. This one they put in the shape of a pizza. Tomatoes, parsley, onions, oregano, peppers, maybe some spinach, but all the ingredients that you need to grow a pizza. I've seen it too where people have grown wheat, so the whole idea was that you could do a farm to table. But honestly, you have to grow a lot of wheat to make your pizza dough. Pizza gardens are a lot of fun to do if you have kids or grandkids, and kind of let them kind of take charge of that, grow their ingredients, and then make their pizza garden or their pizza from the garden. You guys all know this one, the salad garden, thinking about what you love the most when you go to a salad bar. So cucumbers, lettuce, tomatoes, peppers, radishes, spinaches, green onions. The great thing about a salad garden is that you can start that pretty early in the year. You can start your lettuces and spinaches or cold season plants, so you can start them at the end of February. Think about when maple syrup is happening, you can plant your lettuces right into the garden and then put some plastic over them if it's gonna snow. If it's just cold, it's not a big deal. But if it's gonna snow or freeze, you'll wanna cover those. But you can grow your lettuces and your spinaches right out there in the cold part of the year. And then also in September, when you're harvesting off your zucchinis and your green beans and all of those, you can plant another round of lettuces and spinaches that you can grow. Typically around Thanksgiving is about the time that I see things starting to stop growing in my garden. The raised beds that I inherited when I moved to my house in July of last year, I did not replant my lettuces this spring because I wasn't actually going to keep that bed that my salad garden was in. I was going to make it a different bed, put different things in it. But a lot of my lettuces apparently have been growing there for a long time because they completely resprouted without me planting anything. So I have a pretty healthy salad garden going right now, and that's kind of been a happy accident, right? So your cucumbers are going to need a little bit more space in your salad garden. I would plant half of my raised bed and the lettuces and the spinach, and then put the peppers and the cucumbers at the other end. Other than in salsa, I don't eat tomatoes, so I wouldn't put a lot of tomatoes out there.
What do you do with all your salsa?
I will eat salsa, but I don't eat tomato, but I gave a ton of it away. Like for Christmas that year, everybody got salsa and a bag of chips. And they didn't just get a jar of salsa, they got 6 jars of salsa and a bag of chips. Bees and butterfly gardens, also known as our pollinator garden. These are incredibly important to all of our gardens in Indiana, but just in nature in general right now. On average, we lose about half of our bee population every single year to the varroa mite pandemic, and our bees are just in a lot of trouble. So if you can provide a habitat for our pollinators, I always encourage people to do that. And if you put your pollinator garden near your vegetable garden, that's always a bonus. Our bees are responsible for pollinating 60% of the foods we eat. So we want to make sure we provide them with enough food that they continue to pollinate our food for us. Perennials are your best bet when you're talking about a pollinator garden. Bee balm, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, those are all really good choices. Butterfly weed, butterfly bush, they attract the butterflies and the bees as well. They're high in nectar. Joe Pye weed is one that looks kind of like a weed that you would find along the side of the road. Bergamot is another one that looks kind of like a roadside weed as well. They're not real showy, pretty flowers, but they sure are popular with the pollinators. So putting them in your landscape is a good idea as well. if you're gonna do a pollinator garden or a bee garden, it's worth the drive to Muncie to Spence Nursery to get the plants from them. They specialize in native landscaping plants, and they are just a higher quality perennial than what you would be able to find at Lowe's and Menards.
Because milkweed is very hard to find.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. If you are going to the Earth Day event at the Arboretum on Saturday, you will get milkweed seeds in your goodie bag. The Earth Day committee purchased milkweed seeds and is sending them home in everybody's goodie bags. For those of you who weren't here at the 10 minutes before the class started, we were talking about the Earth Day celebration on Saturday the 24th at Hayes Arboretum. It is a drive-through event this year. We are going to have the Woods on Wheels from the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, so you can check out that exhibit. But because of the rain on Saturday, we are not going to have any booths available for that event. They're giving away pawpaw trees, tulip poplar trees, and shagbark hickories. Thank you, Beth.
Which trees? I didn't hear.
Tulip poplars, shagbark hickories, and pawpaws. And then they'll also have the seed packets in the goodie bags. And the Cardinal Greenway has pedometers that they put in the goodie bags as well, so that if you want to track your steps, get some exercise, those are in there too. If you're going to plant milkweed seeds, I recommend starting those plants inside. The seeds need to be striated, which means that you have to give them a special treatment before you plant them. They'll put in a single layer on a wet paper towel and then put them in your refrigerator for 3 weeks. They need to go through that cold cycle. After they go through your cold cycle, then you can put them in your soil medium and let them sprout, and then you can, after they're about 2 inches tall, you can harden them off outside and then plant them in your flower beds or wherever you're gonna plant them. Did you already do your starting seeds class too? Did she talk about striating your seeds and?
She talked about hardening them off. I don't remember striating. Maybe
It's more of a tree issue than a garden seed issue. A lot of your tree propagation, like your acorns, have to be frozen before they'll sprout. So they call that striating.
So milkweed that you just pick up along the trails, do you have to put them in the refrigerator too?
Yep.
Even
if you
if they've been out all winter?
Well, if they've been out all winter, no. But if it's milkweed that you collected as they went to seed last fall,
No,
then
like just recently.
then you should be fine planting it. You can also plant your seeds if you have extra space in your refrigerator or an extra refrigerator. You can also plant your milkweed into the soil and then just put your soil and everything in the refrigerator. Sometimes if you put seeds in a paper towel in a plastic bag, they get lost in the fridge and then you find them like 6 months later and you don't know what you've done. So if that's going to be a problem for you, just go ahead and plant them and just refrigerate the soil and all. And maybe your family will think you're weird. My family just stopped asking questions like 5 years ago. When you plant a pollinator garden, make sure you include a water source. A water source is super easy for a pollinator garden. They need something to land on. So you can just take an old saucer from the bottom of a clay pot that you set it on and fill it with water and then put a sponge or something in there or a couple rocks in there so that it can land on the rocks and get a drink of water from what's in between them and not like landing in a puddle of water where they might drown. So give them something to land on and to get a drink from. But those can be very shallow. They can just be small, shallow dishes of water and they'll find it. Shade garden for the north side of your house. People always say, Stephanie, what do I plant in the shade? If you are a hosta fan, hostas are amazing. Hosta is this one right here in the middle. That one is a mouse-eared hosta. I forget, I can picture his face and I can't think of his name. Has like 100 and some different species of hostas growing at his house. He'll come to me later what his name is. But anyway, hostas comes in so many different varieties, so many different shapes and sizes. I'm not a huge hosta fan, but I know there are people who love them because they're super simple to take care of. They come back year after year. You can get the giant variety that just grows into this 5 foot in diameter plant, and then it's like no worry, right?
You need one.
That's right. There's a lot of different ferns that you can plant that are sold at your nurseries too, that grow. They look really beautiful right alongside the hostas in this, like in this kind of a landscape. And then that purple flower is foxglove. Foxglove is really good for the pollinators as well, so you can plant that in your shade garden too. Just gives it a little bit of a pop of color. Lily of the valley are these little white ones that grow up. They're gonna grow up and have their blossoms pretty early on, and then by probably the end of May they've stopped blooming, and so then you just have their greenery there. But so they'll provide some like early pops of interest while your hostas are getting some size on them. Of course, we don't want to forget the flower garden. I didn't really put a lot of information on this because you guys have all seen pictures of beautiful flower gardens. I'm sure you guys have all planted some beautiful flower gardens, and there are so many different varieties out there, so many different ways for you to arrange your gardens. If you have any questions about specific garden flowers, I'm happy to answer those. But we have the ones that grow from the bulbs, we have the ones that grow from seeds, perennials, annuals, the whole thing. Yes, Beth?
What are some native to this area that are easy?
Easy?
And if they're pretty, that's fine too. But
Okay, so I love anything that's coneflower. So your black-eyed Susans are related to your coneflowers, but purple coneflower, yellow coneflower, the white coneflower version. Coreopsis is another in the coneflower family. Blazing Star, which is kind of like a coneflower. It has red and yellow and orange petals that are striped. They're really pretty as well. Super easy. They're all ones that you plant. They come back year after year. Black-eyed Susans will spread pretty easily. And they're kind of like the kind that pop up where you weren't expecting them either, so those are kind of fun. I always love it when I have random plants pop up. Daffodils they're like one of the first plants in the spring, and I'm a huge fan of daffodils too. They're pretty easy to take care of. Just make sure that after they're done blooming that you don't mow down the green. You need to leave the green part growing for most of the summer, because that's what's building feeding your roots for next year's growth. Daffodils, when they get too big for an area, you can dig them up and split them. Share them with a friend, move them to a different part of the yard. They're pretty easy to split and transplant. They're pretty hardy when you do that. Tulips, some varieties are pretty easy to grow, some varieties are a little bit harder. One of my biggest beefs with tulips is the petals fall off too soon for me. I like ones that last a little longer, but they're easy to grow. So, those are some of my favorites. Do you guys have any favorites that you want to share?
Daylilies.
Daylilies.
Daylilies. I like them because they're edible.
Yes.
What? They're edible.
which part?
Daylilies, the flower,
Like the flowers out of them?
yeah, you take that and you put that in your salad and put it in your fruit.
Is it good?
Yeah, yeah. Tastes kind of sweet and delicate. Yeah, in fancy restaurants, they fill them with some sort of cream cheese and serve them on the side of your plate. So make sure that you're eating daylilies, not the Easter lilies like everybody is. Those are not edible, just the daylilies.
Nasturtium's the only one I think of that's really.
Yeah,
Squash blossoms.
You can eat the
Squash
flowers,
blossoms.
the leaves, everything. Pansies too, I think.
Pansies are edible and violets are edible. Pansies and violets, you can spray them with your spray bottle and then dip them in sugar and put them on top of your cake and have a candied flower for the top of your cake. Dandelions are edible. You take those yellow ones and put a little egg and flour and fry them up, and they're not terrible. But the dandelion leaves are also, you can put those in a salad, and the young ones are pretty good. If you wait too long in the summer, they get bitter, but the ones that you can get right now are pretty good in a salad.
The young ones are good, and if it's too bitter, you can put what are those flakes? Nutritional yeast, I find sweetens it up.
Huh.
You can also cook them like greens.
I haven't done that.
Isn't there dandelion wine too?
Yes, I did make the wine a few years ago, and it is
Questionable.
questionable. I made dandelion jelly though. I found an old pioneer settler recipe for dandelion jelly, and it wasn't too bad. It was really kind of tasty. Wasn't something that you'd want like, ooh, I want a peanut butter and dandelion jelly sandwich, but it was decent on toast in the morning. So lots of different options for a flower garden.
Now, I've got lilies that keep coming back every year. I don't know that they're indigenous, they're native to Indiana though.
I think for a long time, people planted a lot of the landscape plants without regard to being native or non-native. And when we talk about native and invasive, there's some different categories. So we have the native ones that have always been here. We have non-native ones that have not always been here, but those non-natives can be non-native but okay, or non-native and invasive. And non-native and okay is where the lilies come in. Non-native and invasive would be like your honeysuckles, the garlic mustards, the things that just take over a landscape. So a lot of lilies haven't historically been here, but they were brought here when people were settling the area and to make the area more beautiful, and they still grow here. We won't spend very long on this because this is a whole nother class. But I get a lot of questions on this one, so I wanted to introduce it to you if you haven't already heard about it. But this is called square foot gardening. And this was a philosophy that was presented as something that if you had just one raised bed and just a little bit of gardening space, how do you maximize that space to feed your family? So the idea here is that you divide your garden into square foot plots, and then within those square foot plots, you would grow the tall things in the middle. So you would put your tomatoes, anything that's going to grow 18 inches or taller, you put in the middle, and then you put your smaller stuff around the outer edge. So over here it tells you what to plant in those square foot grids. So if you wanted to plant watermelon in your garden, you would plant one plant per 2 square feet. So that's what this category is. And then one plant per 1 square foot here. But if you were planting carrots, you could plant 16 seeds per square foot. So it tells you how much you can grow in that area. Square foot gardening, I looked up, do you have it?
We've got one of the books.
One book, there you go.
There's another one upstairs.
One magic square. But you could use the same theory of square foot gardening and maximizing your space as a rule of thumb for your container gardens. So if you were going to decide that your container garden is the route you're going to go, you can use the square foot garden method. And there's that chart, I pulled it right off of the internet, so you can look on there and get it. But if you really want more information, you can send me an email at the Cook Center, and I'd be happy to provide it for you. It dawned on me what I was going to say earlier when I was like, what was I going to say about container gardens? So I lived on the farm, on my grandparents' farm, had the huge garden, but then I moved off of the farm into a cabin in the middle of 22 acres of woods. So obviously I didn't have a garden in the middle of the woods. Even if I could have had the space to have the garden, I had too much wildlife to make a garden functional for me. So I transferred everything that I was going to grow into my garden into a bunch of containers that I put on the deck. And that actually changed the way I gardened a fair bit, because I learned that I didn't really need that huge garden. I could just grow what I wanted and not really grow everything under the sun anymore. But that was a really great way for me to kind of keep keep us some fresh fruits and vegetables and have a small garden around the deck. And a beautiful deck with all the plants growing on it too. So, square foot gardening. If you haven't ever tried any of the square foot gardening theory, it is a lot of fun to do a square foot garden and a garden bed and just kind of see how much you can grow, what you can do with it.
I just never understood how a watermelon or a pumpkin's gonna fit in that. It just,
Into that space.
yeah.
Well, so when the watermelon or the pumpkin starts growing, of course it's a vine, so it's gonna kind of, it doesn't know it has to stay in the square foot. So it does kind of take off down the middle of the bed and do its own thing. And you just kind of let it. But I think what it's telling you on that is that like the nutrient load, then your nutrients are just for that, that space. Or like what it's gonna require the plant to take from the soil is for that 2 square feet. Does that help?
Yeah, I wasn't very successful with that, so.
No. No. All right. So it's question times. Thank you for coming. Again, I'm Stephanie McCurdy. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are green onions just small onions?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So, green onions, they sell like a package of seeds that just grow. I think they call them nibbling onions or something like that. But they don't grow the bulb at the end, so they're like the green onion. But then you can also grow your regular onions that are going to grow into the bulb. You can take those and use the tops as green onions, and you have to pull them when they're young.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah.
dime or quarter size, and use those as green onions
And
as
they
well.
are stronger than the,
Yes, the nibbling onions. Yes. Yes.
I grew what was called multiplier onions one year, and I got the bulb at the bottom, and on the top, I got little baby onions coming out. And so I take those off and I plant those. It was really fun. I never heard of them before.
Yes. So all of your onions kind of do that, and the ones that you're talking about have been selected. Yeah, selected and bred to continue to do that, so it's more obvious. But all of your onions will develop that seed pod at the top that you can take off and replant your onions.
No, this wasn't a seed. This was actual little bitty onions.
That is amazing.
Yeah. It was so much fun.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Thank you so much for having the expertise and know-how and being helpful to us. So a very small token of gratitude inside the card. We appreciate that. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. We have one more session left. We are on a wait list, but every week we've gotten to at least one wait list person. So if you know someone, please still sign up. And I know we've talked about this, but Earth Day is the Earth Day celebration that's local to our community is this Saturday at Hayes Arboretum from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Drive-through event. Stephanie's been on the planning committee. It's a collaboration between many different organizations in town, including having the DNR and some other outside resources coming to us as well. So thank you so much, and